Yeah, I'm here with Dr. Kathi Aultman. She's a retired OBGYN and who carried out over 500 abortions in her career, and she had a conversion to Christianity. And she's now a strong pro-life activist that wants to change minds and hearts with her story. And yeah, thank you, Dr. Aultman, so much for sitting down with us.
Oh, it's great. It's great to be here. I feel really honored.
Yeah. So can you just can we just start by, can you tell us your story? Because how did you grow up and how did you become a doctor, and how did you decide to actually, carry out abortions or become a genealogist? How did it all begin?
Well, I was one of those kids who loved to dissect things, and I used to volunteer to clean my father's fish when he caught fish so that I could see the insides, and I would even dissect the eyes so I could find the lens. And so I just was always interested in that kind of thing. If my mother was going to cook hard at night, I wanted to have it first so I could pour the water in and see how the valves worked. So from a young age, I just knew I wanted to do something in science. And my father was a Methodist preacher, so I grew up in the church, but by the time I got to college, I was an atheist, partially because of different things that I saw go on in the church and the way some people treated my father. And to make a long story short, ended up getting pregnant after graduating from college, but prior to going to medical school, and chose to have an abortion because I was afraid I wouldn't be able to be a doctor. I was afraid of what people would think of me, and I was afraid that if we had to get married because of the pregnancy, that the marriage would end in divorce. So I had the abortion, and when I got to my residency program, I felt strongly that no woman should have to carry a child that she didn't want. And I became a real strong advocate for women's right to an abortion. All OBGYNs are required to learn how to do at least first trimester suction abortions, unless they opt out because of conscience in the United States. And 2 of the men in my program did that. I didn't, of course, because I agreed with it. And after your first year, you can get your medical license, and then you can, what we call moonlight, where you get a side job because being a resident doesn't pay hardly anything. And so instead of getting a job in the emergency room, which a lot of residents did, I got a job at an abortion clinic, and so did abortions to make money. I did not see any difference between a human fetus and the chick embryos that I used to dissect in college. I didn't think of them as human. And it was interesting because if my patient wanted the baby and she miscarried, then I'd be really sad with her. But if she didn't want the baby, I had no qualms about doing the abortion for her. The only time that I had any qualms about doing abortions was during my neonatal intensive care unit, where I realized that I was aborting babies the same age as babies we were trying to save. But I was able to compartmentalize that, kind of shoved it to the back of my mind and didn't really think about it too much. I even went so far as to continue doing abortions while I was pregnant, and I saw no contradiction in that. My baby was wanted, theirs weren't, so I saw no problem. When I went back, after I had my baby, when I went back to the clinic to do abortions, that's when there was a problem. And somehow I'd made that baby-fetus connection, I think. And there were 3 patients that basically changed my mind. The first one I had done 3 abortions on already. The second one came in with a friend who asked her if she wanted to see the tissue, and she said, no, I just want to kill it. And then the third was a woman who had already had 4 children, and she and her husband didn't think they could afford another, and she cried the whole time. After that, I could no longer do abortions just because a baby wasn't wanted. The really sad thing was that I still believed in abortion, and I still referred for abortion. And it wasn't till later, at one point, I became a Christian, but still believed in abortion, but began to surround myself with Christian friends. And one day, one of them said, Kathi, I know that you feel strongly about abortion, but would you read this article? And it was an article that compared abortion to the Holocaust. And my father was with the unit that liberated the first concentration camp in World War II. And so I grew up with all those pictures. And I could never understand especially how the German doctors could do the things that they did. But as I thought about what I had been doing, I suddenly understood. And it was because just as I did not consider the fetus as a human being, they didn't consider their victims as human beings. And that was the first time I saw myself as a mass murderer. And right at that time, Ted Bundy, who was an infamous serial killer in the United States, he'd been arrested and was in the news. And I thought, oh my goodness, I've killed a lot more people than Ted Bundy. So I ended up, graduating, went into private practice. Thankfully, I did have Christian friends who helped me get counseling that I needed to heal. It was interesting. I saw patients in my practice, young girls who had unplanned pregnancies, keep them and do really well. And then I had other patients who were having abortions and then suffering the emotional and physical consequences of abortion. And it really didn't fit with the whole feminist agenda, that I had believed. And so it was through that process that I finally, completely switched over and believed that abortion was truly wrong. And then I just said, okay, God, what do you want me to do? And I got an email that week asking for volunteers to go to Washington to testify on partial birth abortion. So I answered it, and I said, I'll go. And it turned out they already had people, so I didn't have to do that. But that opened the door, and then I ended up testifying throughout the country and testifying in court until finally the partial birth abortion ban was passed. And then everything went back to normal for about 20 years. I ended up having some medical problems, and had to retire suddenly. And after about a year and a half of being home and recovering, I just prayed and said, God, would you still let me do something important? Because I had really wanted to go in the mission field after I retired, and I knew I could no longer do that. And within that week, I got a call that there was a woman who'd been trying to reach me, and would I go to Washington and testify on the heartbeat bill? And so I did. And again, that sort of opened the floodgates, and I ended up, testifying all over the place again. And this time I told God. The time before, I sort of made God prove to me that yes, He wanted me to do what I was doing. And this time I said, I will accept all invitations unless you close the door. And that's been a real faith builder, because He really has protected me. And so that's how I ended up here in Vienna. Teresa called me and asked if I'd come, and I said, okay.
Very good. Thank you very much. Yeah, we're just at the Catholic Resistance Conference, and you spoke there. You gave your testimony, and you also showed the different procedures of the abortions, and you showed videos. You showed animated videos, and already the animated videos are so hard to watch. I mean, it's not even like the real actual abortions, and it's it's horrendous. It's almost impossible how barbaric it is if you actually see it. And yeah, I wanted to ask you, because you said that you realized, oh, I've killed more people than Ted Bundy, and you saw this article that compared abortion to the Holocaust. And how did you like? It must be terrible to realize that you being compared to people who carried out the Holocaust. I mean, it's basically the worst thing that you could be compared to. And at the same time, we know that God wants to forgive us, and he wants to forgive every sin. Like, no sin is too big for God. And how did you find forgiveness, and how did God's grace work in your life after realizing that you've done such a terrible thing?
Well, thankfully, I was friends with a number of Christians. I had gone to church. I was in a church, and one of my friends gave me a book by Susan Stafford Rue on post-abortal syndrome. Excuse me. And it was called Will I Cry Tomorrow? I read that, and that was a big help. And then another friend worked for Francis McNutt, and he had a big Christian healing center there in Jacksonville. And she said, why don't you come up and we'll pray for you? And so I did. And she started praying for me in tongues. And immediately I saw myself at the feet of Jesus. And I could see his gown and his feet. And he said to me, are you more important than I am? Are you more powerful than I am? And I said, no. And he said, well, then why can I forgive you and you cannot forgive yourself? And that's when I think I began to forgive myself for the things that I had done. And she asked if I wanted to see my baby, and I said yes. And I saw this little boy running in the field, and he looked over his shoulder at me, and he said, I forgive you, Mommy. So that was probably the biggest time of healing. And then just over time, God's grace and his love, and he has blessed me so abundantly, allowed me to do things I never thought I would ever do, areas way outside of my gifting. And I think the more I depended on him, and the more I just stepped out into what I thought he was wanting me to do, the better and better I felt. Mm-hmm. I feel like he's really redeemed the worst things in my life and made them, for good, to do good.
Yeah, thank you. That's amazing to hear. I want to ask you about what's the best way, or what would your arguments be like, or the arguments that you like to present to someone who's pro-abortion? Because it's often portrayed as being pro-women's health and pro-women's freedom. Like it's an issue of freedom and women's health. That's what we're told from a pro-abortion side. And then when I engage in discussions, sometimes I'm told, well, I'm neither a woman nor a doctor, so I shouldn't have an opinion on the whole thing. And so I'm asking you, as a woman and a doctor, is this really about women's health and women's freedom, or what do you say to that?
It's definitely not about women's health, and I really don't think it's about their freedom either. The pro-abortion industry has made it all about women's rights, and it's not about women's rights. It's about the murder of innocent human beings. And I think you just have to go back to the basics. Is this a human being or not? And we know from a scientific standpoint that when an egg and sperm meet, you have the beginnings of a unique individual. And this is a human being, our species. And in what other situation do we kill one person to make another person's life easier? Pregnancy is not the worst thing that can happen to a woman. I know people act like it is, but it's not the worst thing that can happen. Women don't have to keep their child if they don't want. Yes, they would have to undergo several months of pregnancy, but most of the time when women find out they're pregnant, they're already several months. So it's a very short time to be inconvenienced, as opposed to denying this other person of an entire existence, an entire life that they never get to experience. Is it unfortunate? Yes. Do we need to be compassionate towards women? Yes. But I think as a society, we have also taken the easy way out. It's a lot harder to say, okay, well, we are going to support women so that they don't feel that they have to abort for financial reasons or social reasons, and, support them throughout the pregnancy. And then if they don't want to carry the child, have good systems for adoption, it takes more work to do that than to just say, oh, will you go get an abortion? And we have done such a good job of lying to young women and making them believe that if they keep their baby, they're going to be poor the rest of their lives. They're never going to be able to get an education. And really all of these lies, when there's so many groups, agencies, and individuals who are really willing to support women in whatever way they need so that they don't have to abort their babies. And yes, there are complications from being pregnant, but there are also complications from having abortions. And my feeling is, and after what I saw in my practice, I don't think a woman can kill her child and remain unscathed. It's going to affect her. She may not notice it right away. It may not be until she has a baby. It may not be until she tries to get pregnant and is unable. But at some point, it's going to affect her.
Yeah. And in your experience, what is the best way to convert someone, or to convince someone, or to start, at least people to see, like you did, that abortion is wrong? How do you get people to the other side? Because there's many different approaches, and people are different. I guess people respond to different things, but what do you think in general maybe are the most effective ways to convince someone of that abortion is evil?
So I think the first thing you have to do is develop a relationship. I think you have to love people. I never would have even considered reading that article if I didn't already have a relationship with that person. So I think that we have to approach people in love. I think God is the one who changes people's minds. I think we can plant the seeds. I think that we need to probably be more vocal in a very benign, loving way, just in our speech, to let people know that we value life, that we value babies, we value women. And then it may be somebody else who's later able to actually ask them some questions. I don't think there's any one approach. I think I have to give a lot of credit to people like 40 Days for Life, where they go and they pray, in front of abortion clinics. I think that's hugely powerful. I used to think, I didn't used to agree with groups like Created Equal, who have the pictures of actual products of abortions, of babies torn limb from limb. And I used to think maybe that was too extreme. But it does. That's what it takes sometimes to change people's minds. The abortion procedure videos where people see exactly what happens in an abortion, those change people's minds, because most people don't really understand what happens in an abortion. They've been told that you're just removing a clump of cells from the uterus. It's not a baby. You're not really killing anybody. It's a big lie. And the sad thing is that when women are told that, and then later they find out that, well, this looked like a baby. This, had two arms and legs and beautiful eyes and beautiful features. When they find out that it really was a baby, they often have terrible, terrible guilt.
Yeah.
So I would say, to answer your question, I think you have to proceed as God leads you. Let the Holy Spirit guide you in how to speak to someone. And again, it depends on what kind of relationship you have with them. I would not have responded to someone yelling at me or telling me I was a murderer or whatever. I would have totally rejected that. It did make a difference to me, however, when I had some of my gynecology patients get pregnant and come and say, Dr. Aultman, how do you feel about abortion? And when I told them that I didn't do abortions, but I thought abortion was important and a woman's right, they said, I love you so much. You've been a wonderful doctor, but I can no longer continue to see you when I'm pregnant. I'm not going to see someone who does abortions. And that, it didn't change my opinion right then, but it was a little chink in the armor and it began to make me think. So I think it's those little things that just slowly add up that make a difference. I didn't change my opinion overnight. It took a while.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I wanted to know how has your faith influenced your pro-life views? Because that was kind of simultaneous, I guess, or not exactly, but your conversion and to Christianity, and then also your, beginning to questioning abortion. Mm-hmm. Because, there are some pro-life atheists, they do exist, but they're in the minority. Like most people fighting against abortion and for the protection of life have at least some faith background, and mostly Christian are the strongest defenders. And on the other hand, though, there are scientific facts that tell us, like you mentioned, that when the sperm fertilizes the egg, this is a totally scientific argument that human life begins, and then people usually agree that murdering innocent human people is wrong. But then at this stage, they don't see it, or they don't want to see it. So I just wanted to know maybe what you think about that, and how your faith has personally influenced your story, and then why people who don't believe in God tend to not see the problem of abortion.
Well, I think if you don't believe in God, one, you feel like you have to solve everything on your own. You don't have faith that God can handle even an unexpected pregnancy, and so you don't have that to fall back on and that strength. I actually stopped doing abortions before I became a Christian. Now, I did have a religious background because my father was a pastor, but by that time I'd become an atheist. And so it was really just the ethics and the internal emotions, and I think a subconscious knowledge of that this was an innocent human being in my womb, and now I have this baby and I'm killing these other babies. I think it was all of that made me stop doing abortions. But it wasn't, and after that, I think it was within a year that I became a Christian, but I still believed in abortion. But that's how God was able to. He surrounded me with other Christians, and I developed trust in those relationships. And then that was when I was willing to read the article. And then afterwards, it was really God who healed me, and God who's directed my path ever since.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Aultman. I think your story is really remarkable. It shows, God's grace, and that even if you are very pro-abortion, even do abortions yourself or had an abortion, that's not, God's grace is not, stopped by that. God can turn everyone's life around if we are open to it. And I think that's a great message, and your stories, I think, is, can be very, very helpful to many people. So thank you so much for the interview, and thank you for sitting down with me.
You're welcome. Great to be here.
Thank you.